Good morning or good afternoon for those on the East Coast. So my name is Catherine Wilkinson, and I'm going to be the sort of facilitator for this morning's session. So before we really begin, I want to take a moment to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you all today from Wajak Noongar Boodja, here in the salty and windy lands of Welyaluk, also known as Fremantle in Western Australia. The Zoom and virtual worlds were once described to me by writer Cassie Lynch as a country with no gates and as lands with no elders. And so speaking to you all across the URL waves, I am always grateful to be in a place and live as a guest on lands guided and cared for by elders. So I pay my respects to them, past, present, and those to come. Here in the West, we are coming to the end of the Bunuroo season, grasping at the last moments of warmth. So I've come literally from the ocean, with the result that my longish brown hair always looks a little unkempt and salty. I'm fair-skinned and wearing glasses, a recent addition thanks to extended time looking at screens. During this session, I might move a little and change my position just in an attempt to keep my body a little bit more comfortable. And I'm sitting in my home today in a slither of what I hope will remain really good Wi-Fi, surrounded by, there's a lot going on behind me, my fireplace, TV screen, and two wonderful artists, one by Janet Dreamer from Yalil Arts. So hello. To the invisible audience, welcome this morning. Thank you for being here with us for the latest ATAG meetup on programming chronic illness. Thank you to our generous host, Accessible Arts, and producer of these sessions, Hannah Cormick, for the really beautiful invitation. So here with me today, I have artists Andy, Alison, and Yasmin. So I guess this is my invitation to turn on your little video. Hello. And just to let everyone know, Andy and Yasmin will have their videos on, and Alison is just joining us via audio.
Hello,
Hi.
I'm faceless.
So over the next kind of hour, we have the next hour and a half to really make a space for a conversation about what access and inclusion means for artists living with chronic health conditions, and to really explore how venues, festivals, organisations, and the cultural sector at large can respond more effectively, and to create environments where artists with chronic illness not only can participate, but feel included and sort of nourished and supported in their practices. So, just a small conversation today across many, many things. So we really hope that this conversation today can centre the experiences of the artists in this Zoom room, propose solutions and different models of operation. We really hope to sort of dream up new approaches and ways that we might shift how we do process and think about end goals. So as a little bit of background, I am a producer within major arts festivals and also a producer with Data, which is Western Australia's arts and disability organisation. So I come to this conversation with both an awareness of the often rigid structures we're going to be talking about today, and a willingness to explore what it means to shift these barriers, drawing and learning from the experiences of everyone here. So, which brings me to introducing our panel, Andy, Alison, and Yasmin. So I'm going to introduce each of our speakers and then invite them all to really speak about their own practices, just so we can really ground this session in what each of you do. So Andy is an award-winning performer, writer and theatre maker, specialising in physical storytelling. She has an MA from Mount View Academy of Theatre Arts in London, and her career highlights include Edith in Picnic at Hanging Rock for the BBC, Brenda in Neighbours with Fremantle Media, and her 3 critically acclaimed solo theatre works, #Dear Diary, Deja Vu and Other Forms of Knowing, and Happy Go Wrong, with the latter winning numerous awards and receiving 5-star reviews. Andy is also a proud ambassador for the Lyme Disease Association of Australia. Hi, Andy.
Hello, everybody.
Hello. So I'll keep introducing everyone and then loop back to you all. Is that all right? Yeah. So Alison is an award-winning performance poet, producer, event host, and state poetry slam champion, representing the state at the National Poetry Slam at the Sydney Opera House in 2016. Alison has featured for a variety of literary performance bodies all over South Australia and has been involved in numerous collaborative projects statewide. Her first solo production, Floral Peroxide, sold out its 2019 Adelaide Fringe season, and an encore performance was staged at the closing of the festival. Floral Peroxide was granted the huge honour of winning the Graham F. Smith Peace Foundation Award at the Adelaide Fringe Awards ceremony in 2019 and went on to show at Melbourne's Butterfly Club. Hey, Alison.
Hello, thank you for having me today in this exceptionally inclusive environment.
And Yasmin.
Sorry.
No, you're good. Yasmin is a multidisciplinary storyteller across performance, writing, visual art, and TV film. She aims to create stories that uplift, engage, and promote diversity in innovative ways. Her works explore ideas of belonging, identity, liminality, spirituality, the environment, race, health, and being the other. Recently, Yasmin was selected as a Midsummer Pathways recipient for the 2020-21 and was selected into AFTRS Talent Camp and selected to observe in TV Writers' Room and awarded a diversity scholarship in improv and sketch comedy. Yasmin produced Adelaide's first Street Arts Festival, and her works have been shown internationally and nationally at various festivals. Hi, Yasmin.
Hey.
So, Andy, I was wondering if you could start. I know I've read the bios, but I actually think it's so great to hear about artists talking about their own works directly. So it would be great if you could give us a little overview of your work and maybe what you're working on at the moment.
Yeah, my absolute pleasure. Hello to everybody listening. Just to quickly describe myself, I'm a white woman in her late 30s, but my casting age is still in my 20s, so that gives you an idea of how I look. I have long brown wavy hair that I'm wearing to one side today. I'm wearing a very bright, colourful t-shirt and big blue earrings. I am here in my backyard in Adelaide, so surrounded by some lush greenery today for you all. Beautiful. So yeah, I am a performer, writer and theatre maker. And my current show that I've been working on, that I've just come out of Adelaide Fringe 2021 with, is called Happy Go Wrong, which is a physical theatre odyssey. It's a celebration of mortality, really, and very much is born out of my lived experience with chronic Lyme disease and other chronic illnesses that go hand in hand with that. So I do very much put that front and center on stage in my show in wonderfully playful and also very abstract ways. Certainly my journey with this show in particular is a good example, I think, of an artistic process that is working with the needs of a chronic illness, sometimes in resistance to or against those needs, but ultimately has been an experiment, as much of an experiment for me and my body as it has been for the various venues or other people and collaborators who I have worked with. This has been the show, my first show returning to the stage, in fact, after many years of being too unwell to perform. But yes, this has been the first show back where I have really learnt on the ground as I've created this show and then eventually put it up in festivals. I've learned how to navigate my needs and then effectively communicate those, and in some cases, you know, have those addressed or not have those addressed, and then having to deal with that. But I think the very first step in all of that for me has been just understanding what my own needs are. I think often when we have whether it's a chronic illness, a disability, or a thing, you know, because I think all humans have a thing. We all have needs to varying degrees. I think we can forget that that thing, whilst it might become very normalized in our chronically ill lives, actually isn't necessarily, you know, doesn't necessarily fit in with certain models that arts organizations or festivals have in place. So the first lesson for me was just learning, well, what actually are my needs, and how do I communicate these? Because I think oftentimes, yeah, as disabled and chronically ill artists, we can also often just think, oh, well, I just have to try and take care of my own needs as best as possible. I can't expect anyone else to take care of me. So, you know, I'll just have to try and work that out myself. But in fact, no, I think that it's very much important that, yeah, we feel able to have certain discussions with venues, programmers, organizations, and all that, where we can be upfront, obviously only ever sharing what we wish to share, but that there is space allowed for that conversation, I think, is very important. Yeah. Otherwise, it can feel like you're shoehorning yourself into, you know, a model that, yeah, doesn't always consider that people might have differing needs. Even my own understanding of what access means has changed over recent years as I've entered the wonderful disability arts community and learnt from others who have different needs to me, and some that have the same needs as me. I've learnt a lot that access isn't just, you know, a ramp into a venue, or having Auslan interpretation or audio description on your work. Those things are absolutely very important, but it can be other things that, yeah, I know for me, can be more to do with energy management. I sort of have energy quotas that my body needs to take into account. And so certainly scheduling, which I think will be a topic we'll probably all talk about quite a bit today, that's been a big one for me, rehearsal schedules, and also then when being actually in a festival, yeah, I'm currently not able to do the old school standard, you know, six shows in a row type situation, you know, pump it out 4 weeks in a row for a festival. That's not helpful or healthy for me. And that's certainly one aspect that has stood out for me in being an indie artist with a show. Even just trying to find a venue, for example, at the recent Adelaide Fringe Festival that I had a really successful run in, was, to be frank, was a torturous process. I actually almost couldn't find a venue that would take me because I was unable to fulfill their standard, you must do 6 shows a week. I actually had venues flat out reject me because of that. And at the time just found that confusing and discriminatory, although I didn't sort of push back against it. I was in that, yeah, difficult position where I wanted to obviously get my show up. I wanted to make it work. So I had to just, along with my producer, who has been wonderfully supportive and fantastic, we had to come up with our own creative solutions in order for a venue to even take on my show. So that's just one example of many that I have. And I'm aware we've got other panelists who wish to share their experiences too. So perhaps I'll leave that there for now, but there's certainly plenty I could say around expectations and standard models that are currently in place in terms of programming, that just perhaps they're not aware that there are people with differing needs around that. Yeah.
Thanks, Andy. And, and that very much frames where that, I was hoping our conversation would originally go, because sort of our initial conversations, there was very much that, idea of sort of barriers to participation within the cultural industries. And actually in our conversation, it was, this idea that you were participating, but actually there was all these sort of expectations and requirements that were difficult for you to meet, or resulted in sort of financial burdens or detriments to your health or to your work and the way you wanted it to be presented. So whilst there was this idea that there was participation, actually the internal workings of these systems were fundamentally exclusionary. And so in a way, I can frame that over to Yasmin, perhaps to talk about some of your work, but actually to speak as well in the way that Andy took direction with, to really unpack, I guess, your experiences and some of those internal barriers. And I'm really sort of trying to land on also those barriers in the early process of making and presenting work.
Awesome, thanks. Hi everyone, I'm Yasmin, or Yasemin, which is my Turkish birth name, or Yaz. I have pink hair. I'm wearing a pink 1920s satin robe. I'm in our lounge room at home, and very excited to be here. In regards to the question, gosh, my practice is so varied, and I think, I don't know if it's the ADHD, but I've always been a shapeshifter. I've worked across film, television, visual arts, and performance. I've been a curator and a graphic designer. I've done a lot of stuff, but I guess what ties that all together is being a storyteller. And I like telling stories about, I guess, what would be seen as outsiders or people who aren't, I guess, in the mainstream media. And being a person of color and queer, I do also like telling stories like that. Many years ago, I had a trans story about a trans dominatrix. It was a short film, which was a mystery and thriller, which I got some Feast funding for. So I've always, wanted to see more representation on screen and in the arts. And I've curated accordingly as well when I've put on festivals and events. And I guess that, I'm always drawn to things that are subversive or help enact change in the world. But as well as that, I do love being silly and doing improv and comedy. So most recently, I am proud to say that I finally put on a long form one-woman show, which was called The Illest for the Adelaide Fringe. And that received a COVID support grant, which I would not have been able to afford to do. And like Andy was saying, oh God, as part of the grant, I'm very grateful. I had to do 10 shows. So that was very hard for me, from going from no shows to doing 5 shows a week. It was quite a phenomenal effort because I have endometriosis amongst other things, and perfect timing. I had my period during the performances. So that was extra challenging, and I had a virus, but the show must go on. I did, however, get a COVID test for one day of my show, and I cancelled accordingly. So I'm really keen to, I just think the media is so powerful to have either chronically ill or disabled characters in film and TV. And I'm looking to pitch stories to broadcasters about this. Even when I was in a writer's room, I sort of slid in some character suggestions for endometriosis or other illnesses, just because we don't often get representation. So with The Illest, it was quite personal because it was about my journey living with undiagnosed endometriosis and ADHD. And I wasn't until my mid-30s till I got that diagnosis. So it was about, happy topics like medical gaslighting and I guess feeling like I was a bit crazy because the doctors kept reiterating that there was nothing wrong with me despite my immense pain and heavy periods and the total years lost to my illness. And I really want to be an advocate for change in these matters and help reduce the endometriosis diagnosis as well. But I guess also for me, one of the biggest obstacles has been financial. It's a chicken and egg situation. You need money to be able to study and put on shows, but you also aren't experienced enough to get grants. And it's sort of like this catch-22 club of privilege that you sometimes have to kick down the doors or wait for initiatives like the Fringe did this year. Otherwise, yeah, I would not have been able to fork out $5,000 to do a Fringe show. Like it's a lot of money. And yeah, and also just, I guess, in film and television, I'm going all over the shop. It's very ableist, and you have to hide your illnesses and they ask you questions. So yeah, I really want to see that change. Just because I have an illness doesn't mean I'm not a capable worker. And there are times I might need time off, but so does everyone else. And yeah, I'm a big girl. I can figure out which jobs I'm right for. So yeah, I really want to see more change in film and television, because yeah, how can people like me tell stories if we're excluded from even being hired? So yeah, I really want to, for disability and chronic illness to be more mainstream and accepted. Thank you.
Thank you. And Alison.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, everyone. I apologise that nobody can see my face today. It is actually, in fact, because I am currently in hospital. So realistically, quite apt that a panel that's about accessibility for artists and producers with chronic illness and disability are so incredibly accommodating. And I also want to thank my incredible treating doctors for actually being accommodating and getting me out of a 4-person shared bay in a public hospital into a quiet private office here today. I will just briefly describe myself so you can have some idea of who you're talking to. I didn't think anyone really wanted to see my week-old bed hair, because I've been in here for quite a few days now, and I'm not looking the best. And realistically, it's more about the fact that it really screws with my aesthetic, and I didn't want anyone to see me like this. But normally, I have bright red hair that is shaved bald on the sides and the back. I am a slight person with a small build. I'm currently wearing pajamas, but I also have on my face clear and gold cat's eye glasses, and I'm sitting in a hospital office room. So that is me. I'm just sitting here, although you cannot see me, as both Andy and Yasmin are speaking. I'm just like nodding my head like, sisters, I know. It's just such familiar stories to me. I'll talk a little bit about my work first, so I can sort of introduce what I do. I'm predominantly a performance poet, but I like to I don't really call myself a slam poet as such, even though I kind of won a slam poetry thing once. I'm more of a performance artist in the sense that I like to create work that involves multimedia. My partner is actually a sound designer and electronic musician, so we collaborate on quite a lot of stuff to produce sound art type spoken word and poetry with some, some electronic elements and, sound effects and more of a soundscape. I predominantly, I guess, do a lot of work around reclaiming my own narrative as a chronically ill and disabled person. Not only was I born with a genetic disease, but I also was involved in a really traumatic accident at the age of 4, and that resulted in me undergoing surgeries from the age of 4 to 15. So predominantly my childhood and part of my teenage years revolved around the experience of clinical violation in hospitals. It was a very isolating time. I've always found it very difficult to identify with my body. I think because I kind of exited my body from an early age as a coping mechanism, which then resulted in a long-term struggle with anorexia in my adult years. So I guess for me, a lot of my work, what's really important to me is, I got to this point in my life only a few years back where I discovered the arts and disability community, and I realised that I was actually a disabled person. And I never knew that before because I grew up in an age where, I was 4 years old when I had my accident. That was 1981. And it was something that you kind of, if you passed as normal, and I'm doing nice little quotation marks with my fingers here, nobody, I was badly burnt. So my parents put me in hats all through my childhood. So nobody ever saw what was underneath. My way of kind of interpreting that as a child and a teenager was that I'm that hideous that I have to disguise myself to fit in with society. But I never really kind of correlated the fact that I was actually disabled by society and by society's sort of viewpoints until recently. So it was such a pleasure finding the arts and disability scene and then going, wow, this is so empowering. I want to create a body of work around the experience of taking those traumatic experiences and reclaiming my narrative, because I got sick of people placing labels on me or expectations of who I was and who I wasn't, who I should be and who I shouldn't be. As a chronically ill person, you spend a lot of time unwell, in and out of hospital. Your body is very unpredictable from day to day. You don't know what's going to happen. So I think for me, it's a way of, I guess, taking a bit of control back where I get to say on what terms my body impacts my mental and emotional well-being. So art for me is a really powerful way of also advocating for myself and on behalf of others who may be in that situation that I used to be in, where I felt quite oppressed by others around me. So that's probably enough about my stuff. Yeah, my self-produced show Floral Peroxide that we did in 2019 and 2020 Fringe, that was collaborating alongside my partner 5000 AD. So we wanted to create a fully immersive experience and make it as accessible as possible, because a lot of poetry gigs I would get booked for were very inaccessible, in the sense that I kind of sort of thought, well, if you are deaf or have a hearing impairment, there's absolutely nothing here for you tonight. It's just a person and a microphone waving their hands around. So I really wanted to make spoken word and sound art that was accessible to anyone that could come, and they could read the words on a screen. They could see visuals happen representing what the words were. I used movement and things like that in it. Obviously, there were heaps of elements I'd still love to put into my work in future, but again, financial restraints for chronically ill people, it's a huge thing. All of the issues that Andy and Yasmin have spoken about just ring so true to me. Venue booking for me, exceptionally difficult. I found that when I did find a great venue, they were, particularly after we won the award and we were back for the second year at Fringe, venues did want to have us. They were like, great, awesome, yes, we'll have your show. However, when I said I can't, my partner also has chronic illness, we can't do back-to-back shows night after night. Chronic fatigue, chronic pain are huge issues with me and with him. So that was tough because I found this wonderful venue and they wanted to have us, and we were very happy to be there. But basically what ended up happening is they gave priority to all the other artists and presenters who were booked for that season in Fringe. And then at the end of it, they threw us a bunch of weird random dates and times and said, here you go, pick from those. And our show isn't a family-friendly show. So, some of those times were 2:45 on a Sunday afternoon. And it's like, well, it's not really appropriate, because sending the message that, yeah, bring your kids along, and that's really not a cool thing to do. So that was difficult. Also the fact that there's that financial impact where you can't book like a big season. Like, you can't do what a lot of other able-bodied performers and artists can do, where you can, say, travel interstate and be like, fly in, fly out, go bang, 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 smash out 2-3 shows a day, and then go home and crash. You kind of like, I was successful in getting a grant for Melbourne City Council. We took our show in Melbourne, but it cost us so much money, even though we had that grant, because we had to stay there a lot longer. So we had downtime after each show, we had time to settle and time to go to like bump in at the venue and all that sort of stuff. So, we lost a lot of money on that, but it was about the experience for us. But I think that's something that able-bodied artists and presenters and venues never really kind of take into consideration, because they've never actually had to think about all that extra time you need to allow when you're chronically ill. And time equates to money for everyone. As much as we wish it didn't, unfortunately, that's how the world operates. And especially with festival season, it's all over very quickly and you've got to smash it out. And you just can't do that with chronic illness. So, yeah, I mean, there's so much more I could say, but I'll finish there for now and flip back to you, Catherine. But once again, thank you so much for being so incredibly accessible and inclusive today, to allow me to actually still be here. Because one thing that really, really, really upsets me is all the things I always have to pull out of because of my health, when, I'm perfectly capable of verbalizing what's going on right now. I just can't, have access to a computer and stuff, but I'm still very much wanting to participate, and that's really meaningful for me that you will recognise that. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Alison. I mean, there's so much there, just in terms of the financial and contractual systems that the entire cultural industries exist in, which are incredibly problematic in so many ways for so many people in the community, and so generated towards sort of outcomes and outputs, and sort of putting it into really distinct timelines, that I think that is just, you know, a huge conversation that I do really want to keep having. And I guess, Andy, I'd like to go back to you a little bit more to maybe expand on some of your own experiences in that space. And I guess to everyone thinking about those recent experiences with presenting shows, and what would be those sort of key learnings from each of you that you would want to put forward to the producers of sort of festivals specifically. And I'm curious to know whether you had conversations at the beginning, and whether it sort of just didn't sort of come together in the way that you had hoped. Or Andy, you specifically talked about using your latest work to experiment with the sort of your needs and the relationship of that to sort of venues and presenting. So I wondered if you'd expand a little bit more on some of the learnings there.
Yeah, sure, definitely. I too was just nodding that whole time that Alison and Yasmin were speaking. Yeah, I think the financial aspect is huge. And again, I myself forget, because again, it's just so normalized that all my money is constantly spent on my health and medical bills. I just forget that's yeah, it's so normal for me. But yeah, certainly I know for myself, if I hadn't have received a particular grant that I got to put my show on at Adelaide Fringe, it would not have been able to go ahead. And so it's interesting, because it's not just that there's extra costs relating to my own access, but also me wanting to make sure I'm including access for others within my show is another whole cost that ended up chewing through my entire grant, basically. And I was more than happy to spend it on that. But it did remind me as well that access is expensive, and therefore only accessible to people with certain access to money, which is another whole snowballing kind of catch-22 situation there. So I did manage to get my show both Auslan interpreted and audio described this Adelaide Fringe. That was a first for me. But again, I would not have been able to offer those services had I not received this grant. And the little bit of remaining money left from that grant after hiring those services was spent on my accommodation, which is something Alison just spoke about, that reminded me that, yeah, I have very particular needs around the kind of environments I need to be in. I can't just stay anywhere. I'm not a fringe artist who can rock up and sleep on someone's couch. And so, yeah, that was a huge expense for me, the accommodation, and also needing to arrive at least a full week beforehand to have recovery from the trip over and be ready to go, and then stay on afterwards as well. Was a huge financial cost. And even the kind of medical treatments I needed to pay for during my season in order to be able to do my show is, you could say, another cost of the show. But yeah, in terms of my relationship with venues and that process, I had two differing experiences with this show. One at Melbourne Fringe Festival in 2019, where I debuted Happy Go Wrong, and then this experience here in Adelaide. So at Melbourne Fringe, I suppose I had the luxury there of that being my hometown, and therefore a lot of people in the arts knowing me and knowing that I had a chronic illness. So I did struggle a bit with finding venues there, but what the venue that I ended up going with was able to do, and they put on the table for me, it wasn't my idea, they offered it, was to create a whole new time slot just for my show, so that I could in fact do, back then I was just doing 3 shows a week across 3 weeks of the Melbourne Fringe Festival. So I did 9 shows in total, which is quite a nice number, but spread over 3 weeks was doable for me. Well, even then, that was an experiment. I didn't know if I could do it or not, but that felt like something that was approachable and that was workable for me. So I would perform 3 shows, basically have a week rest, perform 3 more shows, have a week rest, perform 3 shows. That only was able to happen because this particular venue had the brilliant idea to go, let's create a whole separate time slot where only on the Friday, Saturday and Sunday each week, there is a 5:30 p.m. show and it is Happy Go Wrong. So there's never any other show kind of, that would want that slot or that would clash with, because that slot only existed for my show. That was pretty cool, outside of the box thinking, at that time. And as I say, the venue was the one that suggested that. I hadn't thought of that idea. I just said to them, I really can't do more than 3 shows a week, but I want to perform more than just, 3 shows or whatever, because often you have to just purchase 1 week, in terms of venue hire. So that was a pretty cool approach, Having said that, I'm aware that's not always viable for a venue, because they have to put on staff for that, and that's a cost, and all sorts of things. If it was Adelaide, I probably would have struggled with a 5:30 p.m. time slot, for example, because I'm not as known here. Although my season did fantastically and completely sold out, I was on at 8 p.m. And timing is another whole thing. I have to get my body into a particular cycle of sleep and awakeness to be able to perform. Previously 8 p.m. would have been a no-no for me. I wouldn't have been able to perform at that time. My body wouldn't be awake. But I sort of built myself up this time to be able to perform at 8 p.m. and that did work. But yeah, so I guess, getting creative and thinking out of the box with the venue, that was an awesome example there where they created a time slot for me there at Melbourne Fringe, and that did work. But as I say, I'm aware that's not always possible for a venue. And then often, yes, as Alison said, I experienced that too with negotiating with other venues, just sort of getting the dregs of time slots. They kind of program other people and then go, oh, well, we've got this odd date we can't fill here and this odd date there and this odd date there. So there's your 3 shows, but spread over, ad hoc, basically. So then, come Adelaide Fringe, I came into it knowing, okay, I know the system that worked for me at Melbourne Fringe. I did New Zealand Fringe last year, which was just a 3-night season. So that was self-contained, and that venue was okay with that. But for that festival, that wasn't out of the ordinary, that someone might just do a little 3-show season. So that I didn't face that major barrier there, because it was already deemed okay within that model. But certainly for Adelaide Fringe, I know me and my producer were contacting venues June 2020 for Adelaide Fringe, March 2021. So we were very early on it, very proactive. We knew from the get-go what my needs were, and we were very upfront in communicating them, which is another interesting thing. I'm just by my personality default, a pretty open person. So I'm pretty open about my illness, but I fully respect that not everybody is, not all artists are. And I do feel in a way it's a bit of a shame that we have to disclose sometimes so much personal stuff in order to get what we need, as if we feel we have to justify it by going, oh no, but I have to because of blah, 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 blah. And I have this symptom that does this sometimes, and so therefore I can't. And that's tough, because sometimes you do feel like, oh, you're really divulging some personal stuff here when you feel you shouldn't have to. So we were very early in trying to find a venue, and it was getting on to registrations closing, like coming on September, October last year. We still had not found a venue, and we had numerous communications with many venues. We were starting to think of all sorts of solutions, like, gee, maybe we need to find another show to share a booking with, since we couldn't do the 6-night thing. We had one venue sort of going, oh, maybe you could do 1 night on, 1 night off with another show. That wasn't great for my particular needs. I'm better off with like a block and then a block rest rather than being on off. That would be challenging for me. So, you know, there were venues that were sort of trying, but ultimately there was a real strong sense of a lot of venues just going, no, you know, you pay for a whole week, you book a whole week, that's what you got to do, like full stop, not even going beyond that discussion. And a lot of indie venues, you know, they've got it tough financially as well. So I respect that. And let's not ignore the fact that COVID was a tough year financially on the arts. So I think there was a lot of angst for venues, you know, with booking shows, wanting a sense of certainty. So that was challenging. And look, in the end, we went with a venue that, to be honest, I think only really took us because they had a cancellation. They initially said no to us, and then they had an international act booked who, due to COVID, pulled out. So they had this 2-week availability. It was getting close to registration due. Yeah, they said yes to us. It did feel a little bit like, yeah, second pickings. And then sort of the irony of then having an amazing season there that completely sold out, won a bunch of awards. Not that it has to justify anything, but that for me just felt like, yeah, wow. And I almost couldn't have got the season up because I couldn't get a venue that would accommodate my access. Like, wow, that's actually really huge. Imagine if that all didn't happen because of that. So in the end, my producer was amazing and was just like, I'm going to try and program something for the couple of nights. We had to pay for the full week. We had to pay for nights that my show was not going to use. And so he tried to work out, you know, scheduling in some talks and events and things. So, you know, he's amazing and very supportive of me, but that's also like how it should be, you know? So yeah, look, there was a bit of a disappointment for me when it was around registration time last year. I was shocked actually that I had such a tough time finding a venue just around my access needs. So yeah, some big lessons learnt for sure. I think I feel more confident now, having gone through that process, that the next time we get up and do a festival or whatever, yeah, I'm going to be a lot more from the get-go selling myself. And I don't like to have to call upon sort of the disability card, so to speak. It's not a card, it's legit, but, you know, but perhaps not shying away from using terms to venues like, I'm sorry, but that's, you may not be aware, but that's actually ableist, or that's actually discriminatory, that you're not considering it. I understand it may not work, but can we at least have a discussion? You know, for me, it's about, let's at least look into possibilities rather than a blanket, this is the system, so it's a no. And I think if anything, the world responding to COVID in the way they did has showed us that there are ways of being flexible. There are systems that were put in place due to COVID that are the sort of systems that for people like us with chronic illness are helpful. And that I do hope those systems and mentalities that COVID has brought about are retained and are carried over into various, addressing other needs such as chronic illness and disability. And I think also just in finalising on that note as well around money and funding, I feel like there was a lot more funding opportunities for artists in the last year, or more accessible grant opportunities for artists than kind of there ever have been in my career, in my experience. And so I thought that was interesting as well. Sort of a lot of the grant application processes last year were reduced, were made easier. And that again has been a big barrier for me with chronic illness, is just often not having the mental energy and capacity to fill out rigorous applications and to sell myself and to go through all that. The amount of times I've missed deadlines because I just physically haven't been able to do it has been a lot, and that's been a big shame for me. But again, last year I did get a grant because it was it was a lot more accessible for me to sort of apply for the grant. And then in terms of the outcomes that grant required, it was less rigid. For me, COVID has brought about a sense of more flexibility, that again, I think is a good lesson for all of us, that, yeah, for me, access is about being flexible and looking at possibility.
Yeah, absolutely. I was nodding my head so much in that. And, you know, that very much thinking around sort of the legacy of COVID. And I know a lot of that sort of major shift was in some ways frustrating in many ways frustrating for the disability community, how quickly some of those changes happened that were sort of being called on for years. But, you know, there was some incredible learnings, you know, even from the producer side of rescheduling is an option, cancelling is an option. There was this amazing sort of flexibility and, you know, so much more of a consideration for personal circumstance without necessarily having to disclose in incredible detail. And Yasmin, I wondered if you felt like some of those sort of legacies or opportunities have carried forward. Have you seen them sort of carried forward for you in your own making and presenting spaces, or is it sort of not happening? What would you like to see taken forward?
Legacies like grants and initiatives,
or just, I guess, any of the shifts from COVID and our sort of, and the movement and the sort of cancelling and rescheduling and that shift to those digital spaces, like thinking about, for instance, options for rescheduling. Is that something you feel should be put forward? Possibilities for digital, virtual creative developments. How could some of that learning perhaps support you to tour?
Yeah, well, I'm a Midsummer Pathways participant, and that's been amazing. We've been doing Zoom calls and having meetings and workshops online and having mentorship either in person or online, and that's been phenomenal. In terms of being in community and knowing my rights and bouncing ideas of people of, yeah, like how can we create spaces that are more inclusive and more engaging. And I mean, it would be great to be able to cancel. I had to cancel one of my Adelaide Fringe shows, but that was mainly for safety reasons. But to be honest, if I'd had a chance, I would have cancelled that whole week. I was absolutely trashed. You could have tasered me and I wouldn't get out of bed, but I just didn't want to be typecast as having a show named The Illest and then not being able to perform. I didn't want that to, I don't know if it's internal ableism, but I just didn't want to be like, oh, Yaz has cancelled her whole second week. But it was also annoying because I wrote the grant so last minute. This is about accessibility because I don't often apply for grants. I mean, I have a pretty high success ratio, but sometimes I'm a bit befuddled by some of the grant results. But in this time, I was befuddled that I got it. I mean, I do have a history of performing in the arts, but I wrote my grant pretty much on the day it was due, and luckily I knew a venue manager in Adelaide, and that didn't leave much time. So unfortunately, I just wish there was more accessible venues. My venue I thought was accessible actually was really inaccessible. And I don't know, I guess I was naive to think because my mum has a restaurant and her venue is accessible. I just thought these venues wouldn't be up a flight of stairs. So I think I wish I had a bit more time, but with Midsummer, in regards to venues, I'm going to have Auslan interpreting and also wheelchair accessibility, and that'll be the first time. But I wanted to do the Melbourne Comedy Festival and I couldn't because it was so impossible to find a venue that was wheelchair accessible. Like, unfortunately, in comedy, most venues are down in basements or upstairs, and like even Melbourne Comedy Festival was like, I'm sorry, but there's only like a limited list. And I don't know, some of those people that I rang didn't get back to me. And again, it was deadline related. Like sometimes when you have a disability or a chronic illness, you might not have months of lead time to write a grant. You might write it on the week, or you might, you know what I mean? Like that's also something to consider, that yeah, people should be able to write grants maybe as a need by need basis, like to have times like when you can submit a grant, like I have this great idea, but sometimes just having a single once a year grant is quite challenging, I find, because sometimes I don't have a project I want to do and then I have to wait another year, and there's a limited amount of grants I'm sort of able to get. But in terms of performance, I used to work in digital strategy and content creation. So for me, a next step is going to be making more online content and YouTube content and even TikTok content, and yeah, mixing up things like theatre and comedy in a way that's accessible for people and engaging and short form, because sometimes people don't want to watch an hour-long theatre show, as you know, unfortunately, like I find that a bit hard with my ADHD. Sometimes I can't concentrate for long periods of time. And so sometimes it's good to have shows that are like variety shows or shorter shows for people. And but I guess I'm just excited there are more grants, but sometimes they have weird conditions that you have to have been practicing for a certain amount of time. And I think that is like a catch-22 situation, because I have had such a long break in my career that it seems weird to be quoting like a short film I made in 2007. Like, you know, it just doesn't work for me in terms of getting grants. So yeah, in some ways I feel like I'm starting again, and it would be great to have grants for older people too. There's so many grants for people under 35, and like people over 35 exist. And we would also like some money, please, and some support. There is also ageism, so I'd love to see that change too.
Absolutely. We don't all fit neatly into early career, mid, and, you know, established categories at all.
Yeah. Oh, and I was going to say this, sorry. I mean, I got a COVID support grant, so I'm curious what would have happened if there wasn't COVID. Like, I probably wouldn't have done my show. So that's kind of exciting, but also a bit sad that, you know, I would never have been able to put on a life-changing event like I have. And now, is that just because there was COVID and the SA government needed to fill some quotas? And I mean, I'm happy to fill the quota, but I just wish there was more, accessibility across the board. And and I'm excited to only be doing one show at Midsummer Festival. They really get it, and everyone who is chronically ill or disabled should apply for their Pathways program for next year. It was, just the best experience I've ever had.
And could you expand on that a little bit, just in terms of what they're offering, their, you know, the relationships or the structure of the program? What's really worked for you?
Well, so it's for LGBTIQA plus or queer artists and who identify as disabled or chronically ill. I think it's phenomenal because you get paired up with a mentor, and they work so hard for you to get the mentor you want. And you do workshops and seminars together, and they also give you, I don't want to speak out of turn, but I think they also have supported me with Midsummer this year, in that they've waived some fees and they're sort of giving me Auslan interpreting for my show, which I would not have been able to afford. So it's been really great to be part of a community of other artists, because I have felt so isolated and a lot of shame and guilt about my condition, and I've hidden it from people. And just speaking to other people in the group and the other facilitators, it's like, oh, I'm not alone, and we're all badasses and we just need a chance. So it's been great in that, we lift each other up, we find out about opportunities, and also Mama Alto and the Midsummer team, they just go above and beyond any organization I've ever met. They're just always so inclusive and know how to work with our needs. It's just, it's like a utopian paradise. I just, was so blown away by, how at home, at peace, like Alison being free to, you know, not be on video. Like, that's just the norm for us. We don't apologize for our conditions. It's just was like, I can just be me and just not have to explain myself. It was just, yeah, really refreshing and exciting. My life has completely changed. So yeah, I wouldn't have put on this Adelaide show without the confidence I gained through it and the mentorship.
Yeah, amazing. There was sort of a dot point in our notes around this chat around opportunities and challenges for arts and cultural organisations for improving access and inclusion. And, you know, within the thinking of improving access is, you know, more access for everyone. And I always think about access as really about relationship building and paying attention. And tapping in so much to, I guess, some of those opportunities and what's really worked for everyone seems to be so much around this idea of relationship building, around the collective and care networks we sort of, you all and then the wider disability community builds. And I have been thinking so much lately about how you embed that kind of, those amazing networks into institutions, into venues, in that sort of making and commissioning process. And for that, for me, is embedding that as a guiding value in organisations is the way to really change those making and commissioning processes. So I guess before I open, I'm sort of conscious of our time, before I open to our guests to put forward questions, I sort of wanted to put forward like a, you know, radical future scenario question of, you know, what would you like to see venues or the sector, or, you know, it can be a really specific example, what would you like to see them do to embody access as a sort of value and guiding principle, and what would that look like, you know? So I'm happy, Alison, I know it would be great to hear from you.
Thank you. Yeah, on that one, something that was really interesting that was, you know, I was discussing this with a great friend and mentor, a consultant, Martin Sortel, and he suggested, you know, he said, what we really need, you know, a database of chronically ill and disabled producers and artists who are presenting shows. So when festival season comes up, you know, we can, you know, set up sort of a liaising so that everyone has this community, which, because we have a wonderful community in the disability community, and but it's embedding that into the actual industry as a whole, I think, is it should be included as an access element. Like, it shouldn't be up to us as part of the individual collective who are already suppressed as a minority to still have to advocate and seek each other out, because it's like, you know, someone saying to you, oh, are you gay? I've got a gay friend. Oh, I should introduce you. Like, you'll get along so well. And I think it's the same with people with disabilities and chronic illnesses. It's like, oh my God, oh, I know someone with that too. Do you know them? And it's like, yeah, because, you know, we just have this thing where we walk down the street and immediately just know when another person has the exact same condition as us, you know. And it's sort of like, you know, we as chronically ill and disabled people have to do so much hard work in advocating for ourselves as it is, that there's no energy left to do any of the things we actually want to do, like the art that we want to create. And it should be taken out of our hands in that it becomes, like you said, Catherine, you know, embedded as part of an organisational and structural process that occurs. One thing I've found incredibly difficult to understand, particularly with major arts festivals, is all that I've been involved with this far seem to kind of think they've all done a great job with access around audiences and audience participation, which is fantastic. But they never stop to think for a second that access is also about the people performing. And they've got access and inclusion teams, but you can't go to them and say, okay, what do you have set up for performers for access? You know, have you got a collective that we can tap into where we can liaise and communicate together? And even just things like, Andy, with your accommodation and that, you know, most people with chronic illnesses understand that we have a lot of, we've got a lot of stuff every day that we have to do that other people don't have to do, and there's certain environments we need to be in order to fulfill those requirements so that we can function effectively as artists. And if we had a collective that was set up for us, that was there, that we just go, right, when during the registration process for, say, Adelaide Fringe, there's no, I don't actually recall any question asking if you are disabled or chronically ill or part of that community. And I think maybe we need to start looking at, when we have these forms that take demographics and things, we need to start looking at that and then using that information, utilising that information to go, right, here is a complete community that our organisation needs to represent and liaise with a hell of a lot better than what we're already doing. Don't get me wrong, I really appreciate allowances that people have made and that, but it shouldn't have to always be us that are feeling guilty for advocating for ourselves. And it shouldn't have to be us that have to like sleuth around doing detective work, trying to find other chronically ill people interstate who are also artists that are presenting in the season, who might be able to help us out with X, Y, Z, or know where to point us in the right direction. You know, it's really, really exhausting. I think we all go through that in different ways. And I think more needs to happen within the actual sector itself to recognise the needs of artists that have chronic illness, that are not just presenting in festivals, but just in any context, like individual shows here and there, just collaborative performances, you know, the whole gamut. So yeah, that's
yeah, I feel I think a lot of those sort of registration forms and that do have a box like how many members of your team are, you know, cold or whatever it is, disabled or identified as queer. I think there are those tick boxes, but yes, I don't know what they do with that information. Yes, I haven't had the experience that when I've ticked that box, you know, yes, identify as disabled, that then it's like, oh, then they send me some information going, do you know about access to this for yourself as a performer? Like, no, that's never happened. So I think the data is being collected, but it's a question of then, well, what's then done with it? That's an interesting idea with the database. I worry sometimes about separateness. It's a really weird conundrum, isn't it? Because on the one hand, it's like, yeah, I want more access to like my peeps who get it, but also, wouldn't it be awesome if we all just kind of get it anyway? There's that worry of I just worry sometimes about separateness. I think the big thing for me, and I have experienced this with a particular major festival that wanted to program Happy Go Wrong this year, but due to COVID, that situation didn't go ahead. But what I did experience from them was something that I think is helpful and is a great example of what can be done from a organizational, you know, venue festival perspective, is just quite simply one-on-one conversations, you know, actual human to human conversations, so that the final outcomes for both sides are tailor-made to suit both sides. I know with the case with this festival, and it came out of more a COVID mentality, which sort of gets back to what you were asking about earlier, Catherine, with do we think there are legacies or attitudes that COVID has brought about that can be helpful? And this is one example of that, is that this festival sort of said to me, we want to program your show at this venue, blah, blah, blah. But from a COVID point of view, like if we needed to cancel your show because, something kicked off and borders were shutting or whatever, how much notice would you like? And there was an actual back and forth, and it was very much a one-on-one conversation with me, with them, sort of like, what notice do you guys need? Andy, what sort of notice do you need? And I was quite happy for that to be very last minute notice, because I sort of said to them, well, as a chronically ill artist, my whole life is I'm very flexible. I'm very good at adapting. It is a superpower I've now developed, is like I am very good at very last minute going, okay, this can go ahead, I'm all in, or okay, this can't go ahead, I'm fine to just accept that and adjust. I feel we're very trained in this as chronically ill artists. And that I found that conversation alone very interesting, because it was more them thinking COVID perspectives, like how much notice do you need, like if you can't travel and borders shutting and that. But my brain was going, well, yeah, that's like my life anyway. So I'm totally cool with actually being quite last minute notice. And perhaps they were speaking with other shows and other artists who had different needs or requirements, who said, well, actually, I need 6 weeks notice. So I got the impression there that was quite a one-on-one, like they were looking to really tailor make the logistics around the programming the show to the individual. And again, it was taking into account their needs as well. But I found that great and was just like, yeah, why isn't this happening just all the time anyway, kind of thing. So I think that really for me, it just comes down to being able to speak to a human, being able to have one-on-one conversations. There's a lot of filling out forms and ticking boxes, but to me, doesn't mean anything if there's not actual communication. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, Midsummer was great with that. Like, I just feel like they 100% have my back. They get it. They program it into their festival, disability and inclusivity. It's not just a quota. They genuinely are passionate about it. And I want to see more festivals include us, not as an afterthought, but maybe with some compassion and empathy that disabled people take up 20% of the population. So we're not a niche group of people, and we have needs, and we live in an ableist world, so we might need extra assistance. And with that, we need people in positions of power in organizations. Like, there's so many people that are wealthy, upper class people in positions of power who have a lot of privilege, who have never been chronically ill or disabled, and how can they get it? They've never had to really struggle like a lot of us have had to. And yeah, I just want to see more people on positions in organizations and in AGMs, and for us to be included. And with that, though, everyone's disabled experience is different. So yeah, like, get different disabled experiences on your boards and in your meetings and in your panels, and pay us. Like, we're not just consultants volunteering. Like, we have value, and we're going to make your life easier as well. And also the lives of thousands of other people who are affected by these things. So yeah, it's about installing change incrementally, but yeah, making it that, let's have a dialogue, like Andy was saying. Like, we've got to start with connections, and I guess this formality that we sometimes have, why don't we have panels like this with different organizations, or have a conference, or have meetings? Like, I just think there's so many ways that we can all learn from each other. And yeah, and to include key change makers and funding bodies in the government, and make them commit to giving money or initiatives, because it's unfortunately only going to change through money and initiatives and people in positions of power. I mean, we, like, in our community, we're already trying to struggle with so much. Like, it's a lot for us to also do this stuff as well. And I mean, I am an advocate, but yeah, it would be nice to not have to advocate for my own existence on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that we can be creative and have opportunities that other people just take for granted.
Absolutely. And it feels like there's so much conversation around access and the idea of audience experience, and that is so important, but actually so much of the disability community and bringing access into those really early stages of making, of creating, of policy, of contracting, that is the sort of work that really still needs to happen. And I think it does begin with those organizations, like you said, Midsummer and Sydney Festival, who already for you have made that effort to begin those one-on-one relationships. So I want to open it in our last little 15 minutes to the invisible audience, who we can't see, but if you have any questions, we would really love to have them. And I'm just going to take a little moment to read and catch up on the chat. There's a question here around from Lillian, which is around, I think, which we've sort of discussed, this idea of building relationships with organisations, and this idea of future opportunities. And I guess the question is around, have you ever had to sort of draw a line and go, this venue relationship isn't really working for me, I'm not going to pursue it? And was there sort of a specific reason for that? Was it, and I guess her question is around, was it to do with limited access and inclusion? And that just felt like something you were not going to be able to overcome with that, I guess, venue or organisation.
Yeah, I think I like the way too that Lillian references the word anger. She puts that in there, how do you balance the anger of limited access and inclusion and trying to build relationships? I think that's really well framed, because it's that classic thing of, yeah, there can be a lot of frustration and anger that, yeah, not only are you just an artist trying to get opportunity, but you're an artist with this other thing called chronic illness or disability or whatever the other thing is, trying to get opportunity and get that thing addressed so that you can even get the opportunity. It's sort of a lot going on at once. And I do experience anger and frustration at times. And yet it's always that thing of, I want to stay professional because I want to build relationships and not burn bridges. And yeah, I want to be considered in the future for things. And I think that's really well worded, and it is something we all navigate, no doubt. Yeah, I know for me, just like the example I gave with just having the frustration of months and months of calling venues and having so many of them just say no, and not really knowing how to argue back against that. And I think, and that's why I say, at that time I wasn't as pushy, and I don't even like to use the word pushy because it's just me standing up for things I should be allowed to stand up for. But it's interesting that I use the word pushy because I obviously feel like, that's how I might be perceived. And I think I did hold back, and I just kind of had those conversations and felt very awkward on the phone and was like, okay, I guess I'll just look elsewhere. And so I think I'm still learning, to be honest, how to do that. And I think that's just an ongoing learning curve. Having said that, like I said before, I feel like now that I've done 3 seasons with this particular show, I feel more confident that the next time I start to engage in those conversations, that if I feel some of the red flags coming up, I think I'll feel more confident to actually call that out. But certainly I don't really want to be taken on by a venue or a festival that's not really wanting to address my needs. I don't want to be in a fight with them either. So I think it's a very valid discussion point, and it is tricky. I would just say I'm still learning, I'm still learning how to deal with that. It's self-advocacy, yeah, and it's tough, when you're in need of something such as access to money and grants, and that I do sometimes hold back on some of my needs. It's kind of like, I better just prioritize the really important ones because I can't ask for everything. to increase my chances of being accepted, you know. And it can be even just like like I got a residency. I got a couple of residencies, which were amazing and helped me develop this show. And I remember, like, I was too unwell to eat when the residency came around, in this particular residency in Melbourne, like 2 years ago. I was too unwell and I had to then reschedule it. Luckily, that organisation was understanding, and they found me another slot in like 2 months' time that I then did get to do the residency. But that, you know, that was an awkward conversation. And yeah, there is a lot of challenging conversations that, as I said before, get personal, because they end up having to get personal because you have to divulge information, which is tough. Yeah, so I'm very much still learning how to balance that. Yeah, and I'd love to, in fact, hear how the others deal with that as well.
In terms of, sorry, the venue stuff, or?
Well, just in terms of dealing with anything that relates to an arts-related opportunity for you, and coming up against perhaps that opportunity or need not being able to come your way because of access barriers. You know, how you navigate that emotional journey, yeah, I guess, and trying to be professional, you know.
With great difficulty, Andy, with great difficulty, and a lot of mindfulness and deep breathing. But yeah, no, I agree with everything you've said. And if I had some ways of managing it better, I would definitely share them. But unfortunately, I don't, because I'm myself, I struggle with that a lot. I think, I guess for me, coming back to the arts and disability community, the people that I've met through there and the mentors that I've met through there enable me to feel supported and have a voice, so that I can consult with them if, you know, I'm sort of like, look, I don't really know how to feel about this. Should I be asking, you know, or is this unreasonable that they, or what would you do in this situation? And I think, you know, those sorts of mentors that have been there, done that, and are forging the pathways and changing future directions for us as artists, a really, really invaluable source of input. But personally, oh yeah, it's an emotional journey, isn't it? Yeah. So I'm not really sure I can really say much more, because I wish I had some more tangible kind of solution focused approaches.
But I like what you say about a mentor. I think that's a really good suggestion, and that is something, is speaking to a mentor or a fellow artist who gets your situation, to at least talk it through, because the emotional turmoil, like, yeah, I know for my show there's so much behind the scenes that people would have no idea about. That's like physically, just to be able to physically get up and do it, you know. I mean, I'm feeling emotional just talking about it, and it's so meaningful. And I think, yeah, just having that release of talking to a mentor or somebody else who really gets it is crucial, is very important. Otherwise you are completely isolated. And we even have a question that's just come through from Katrina, I see there, that is about how do you overcome the isolation and exclusion which can accompany these conditions. And I think you need another human being who gets it.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Right, yeah, I keep bringing up Midsummer, but I wish there was an issue who aren't queer. Like, and it wasn't actually until a friend told me I had a disability that I even, I did. It took, like, she works in disability and she had to sit me down. I was like, no. And also I think I had this false hope I was going to get better. And I am a lot better, but I'm still quite incapacitated at times, but I know how to manage it. And I've chosen a career that can manage these things. But
I don't even think the word, in what we're saying, the word disabled, I don't think matters or not. That might be a controversial thing to say. I think it's just simply about needs, that we all have needs, and are they being addressed or not? You know, I think, yeah, it's a very personal journey, the one with identifying as disabled. I can really relate to that too. There are times when I'm like, am I disabled enough? Am I this? Am I that? Whatever. But at the end of the day, I'm happy to actually throw that all out the door and just go, I have needs. We have needs. It does pertain to a health-related condition. That's a thing. I can't deny that. And that in itself is valid. Yeah, whether I'm on a day where I identify as disabled or not, which is another whole conversation I won't go into. But yeah.
I think too, with the emotional management and of everything that we deal with, I think this is exactly why we're storytellers, because to us, it's important to us to share our stories so that other people don't feel so alone with theirs. And I think that storytelling in itself becomes a very empowering and therapeutic tool. But that storytelling also, I really, really, really hate the word awareness, because, you know, we seem to have a raising awareness campaign for everything these days. But I think it's bringing about a societal awareness that, hey, here we are, we exist, there's masses of us, please take us into consideration. And I think we've seen that with all the major sort of minority group movements over the years. And we're, you know, with the CALD communities, people of colour, the women's rights movements, the LGBTIQ plus community, the disability community, I think we've all had to fight so hard. But if we hadn't have fought, our voices would have just been completely buried. So I think sharing stories and bringing our voices out there as much as we can through our work and through our art, not just with, oh, I have to constantly advocate and shout and scream about this and that. But, you know, like I know you, Yasmin, do comedy and stuff around what you do. And obviously, Andy, I've seen your shows and there's elements of everything in it. And it really, to me as well, seeing you perform, Andy, really broke down those barriers that, wow, like I know how tough that show would be for you to do. But your physicality, it's, you know, it's your physicality and your passion and your stage presence as a performer is just so, you know, I think what a lot of people in society that don't really understand chronic illness and disability, they just assume that we're going to be really frail, sick people that, what they don't get is we throw freaking everything into our performances on stage and then we collapse into a heap. But it's important to us because our stories that we're sharing have a lot of emotional content, and we need to portray that in a realistic way so that others also go, oh my God, that's exactly what I'm feeling. And I think that the more that our voices are heard as a collective, it assists in the process of actually moving forward as a movement and being recognised as a really important part of society that just should continue along with society like everything else and not have to shout to have its basic needs met.
Yeah,
I probably went a little bit off track there.
No, I like the idea.
No,
that was amazing to hear, and I really like the idea, and I think it's a pretty great way to end, to think about actually practice and the voice within practice leading the way in the advocacy of everything we've been talking about. So I really want to take a moment to thank Andy, Yasmin, Alison for your thoughts and time today, and to thank everyone for putting forward questions. I know we didn't make make it to them all. And I hope this is just the beginning of this conversation. It feels like there's a lot more to come. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thanks to everyone in the chat. I've been following everything everyone's saying. I feel you all with us. It's lovely.
Yeah, absolutely. That's very, very much appreciated. Some of the wonderful comments as well. Really, really super appreciated.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. And yeah, I really wished we'd gotten to some of these questions. They were so cool. Maybe that.
We'll have to schedule in another panel, can we, Catherine?
I'll chat to Liz after this, hey? See you all.
See you.
Thank you. Bye.